So it's day 2 here at the annual meeting of the American Society for Environmental History in Washington, D.C. And as promised, I'm going to give you a bit of a recap of some of the papers that I've seen here at the conference so far. The first thing I want to say is that I think one of the themes that's emerging at the conference this year is a growing interest in energy history among environmental historians. We're seeing a lot more papers exploring energy transitions and a variety of fuel sources in global energy history, from hydroelectricity to natural gas to nuclear power. And so the papers that I saw today and the ones that I want to kind of highlight today all kind of focus in this area of energy history. So first up, I went to a panel that was all about pipelines in North America, called Pipelines in North America, Historical and Interdisciplinary Perspectives. And there's a couple of papers I think I want to highlight from this panel. The first was by Mark Stoller, The Pipeline as Platform, the Role of Pipeline Debates in the Formation of Aboriginal Law in Canada. And in this paper, Mark explored the case study of the Mackenzie Valley Pipeline and the Berger Commission in the 1970s. And what he's trying to do is explore the relationship between environment, infrastructure development, and transformations or significant changes to Aboriginal law. And so he provided this really fascinating case study of the extent to which Northern Aboriginal people were able to mobilize around the Mackenzie Valley Pipeline debate in order to push actual legal changes in the meaning of Treaty 11 and Aboriginal land rights in the North. And this paper worked really well with the panel organizer's paper, Andrew Stoole from Bucknell University, whose paper called Toward a Socially Accountable Environmental Science, Big Oil, Arctic Pipelines, Inuit Protests, and the Untold History of Environmental Impact Statements. This one also dealt with the Mackenzie Valley Pipeline debate, but in a different way. I thought it worked really well with some of the articles we've been publishing on the website here about the intersections between the history of science and environmental history. And what Andrew was attempting to show us was the degree to which the impetus to develop environmental impact assessments brought scientists and Northern Inuit people together in ways that historians haven't previously examined. And so by looking at those intersections between scientists and Inuit people, Andrew was able to show how scientists were not just detached from the communities in which they were working, but they were actually engaged, and local Inuit people were able to use the environmental impact assessment process as a way of engaging with debates in northern development. Next up, I want to talk about a panel that I saw on the role of war, the influence of the Second World War on energy development in Canada, the United States, Germany, and Britain. This focused on electricity, hydroelectricity, and a paper on nuclear power. Matthew Evenden presented on this panel, and he was presenting work that will appear in a book that's coming out later this year. And he had a number of key points that he highlighted on his talk about hydroelectric power generation in Canada during the Second World War, which were quite interesting. So he highlighted that Canada was a bit of an anomaly globally during the Second World War because it had expanded its hydroelectric power generation capacity enormously during the war, mainly in Ontario and Quebec, but more so than almost any other belligerent nation in the Second World War. Most of that expansion was coordinated by the federal government, which used its centralizing wartime powers to mobilize Canadian energy resources for hydroelectric development. And what was really interesting was that the environmental effects of the mass expansion of hydroelectricity in Canada during the Second World War weren't really taken into consideration for the most part, except in cases where the development of a dam or a reservoir would have an effect on the scenic value of highly symbolic landscapes in Canada. And the two that Matthew pointed out were Banff National Park and Niagara Falls. And this paper worked really well together. All the papers fit really well to show the degree to which the Second World War at least in the North American context, worked as a kind of accelerant for hydroelectric development in the case of Canada, and in the case of the United States, the development of interconnections to create a national electrical grid in the Second World War. And I want to wrap up today with a panel that looked at other types of fuel sources, in this case wood and coal. This panel was called Protest and Politics in Energy Transitions from Wood to Coal and Back. Our own Josh McFadyen, one of the editors here at the Niche website, presented some of his work looking at Canadian fuel consumption. In particular, he was looking at firewood. One of the interesting things that Josh has found is that Canadians, especially in cities, were burning firewood well into the 20th century and in quantities that historians have previously not quite understood. And so he took a couple of case studies of Toronto and Montreal in the late 19th century to illustrate the continued dependence of urban Canadians on firewood as a fuel source. Owen Temby from the University of Texas, Pan American, gave a paper on anti-smoke policy in Montreal in the late 1920s and early 1930s, giving essentially the policy history of the development of the first sort of comprehensive anti-smoke bylaw in Canada in Montreal in 1931. And it was a movement that wasn't led by ordinary citizens agitating for the municipal government to address an environmental pollutant like smoke, but it was led by the local board of trade, which saw smoke as an impediment to ordinary commercial business and the generation of profits. So it was a really fascinating case study in municipal political history, but one that really emphasized the degree to which the local board of trade saw clean air as a kind of necessary environmental condition for progress and growth in the city. So those are some of the things that I saw at the conference on day 2. I'll hopefully post something else tomorrow or in the next couple of days, giving you a recap of some of the other papers and panels and roundtables that I'm going to take a look at ASEH 2015.